Nobody who was there that afternoon will tell you it was an ordinary Tuesday. I know that because I was there. Standing maybe 40 feet from the gates when it happened. And I've replayed it so many times since, the sounds, the stillness, the look on that guard's face, that it stopped feeling like memory and started feeling like something I dreamed about, a man I never actually met. But I did meet him. Plus, sort of. In the way you meet a wall. Let me back up. It was one of those October afternoons London does when it's trying to seduce you. The sky had gone that particular shade of grey that isn't depressing, it's just serious. Like the city has put on a good coat and decided to mean business. The leaves along the mall were still holding on, oranges and rusted yellows catching the wind off St. James's Park, and there was that smell, you know the one, if you've ever been in London. In autumn, of wet stone and exhaust and something floral underneath that you can never quite locate. I was there for reasons that had nothing to do with royals. My sister Priya had guilt me into playing tour guide for her university friend, a woman named Deborah from Coventry who had somehow lived in England for 37 years without once visiting Buckingham Palace. It's embarrassing, Priya had said over the phone. Sort of, go with her. Like, take photos. Plus, be a decent human being for once in your life. So there I was. Sort of, decent human being. Holding a paper coffee cup that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Deborah was photographing the Victoria Memorial with the seriousness of a woman documenting evidence for a court case. Every angle, and every inscription. She'd been at it for 11 minutes. I'd counted. The crowd around us was the usual Tuesday blend, a school group in matching yellow high-visibility vests, a cluster of Japanese tourists with proper cameras and rain covers already fitted, 3 American couples in matching fleeces, and the assorted rest of us. The kind of crowd that exists in a permanent state of gentle shuffle, everyone moving and no one going anywhere particularly fast. The guards at the gates, the ceremonial ones, the ones people photograph, were doing what they do. Standing. Breathing, presumably. Being architecturally still in a way that stops being impressive and starts being slightly unnerving after you've been staring at it long enough. I wasn't staring at them. I was looking at my cold coffee, debating whether it was worth the £3.40 it had cost me, when Deborah said, not loudly but very clearly, "Oh. Oh. Is that, to be fair?" I looked up. There were cars. Not tourist cars. Not the black cabs that loop the mall or the delivery vans that rumble past the park gates. These were the ones with the particular shine that comes from being washed by people whose entire job is washing that specific car. Dark. Low. Moving with the deliberate slowness of something that has never, in its existence, been in a hurry because hurrying has simply never been required of it. 3 of them. Coming from the direction of the palace interior. I'd seen enough news coverage to know what this kind of convoy looked like, not police motorcycles, not full ceremonial pomp, just that quiet, organized movement that meant someone significant was heading somewhere. The small flag on the lead car's bonnet confirmed it before I could read it properly. Deborah grabbed my arm. "Which is that the Queen?" she whispered. "The Queen's dead, Deb." "Right." A pause. "Camilla?" I squinted. "Which maybe?" I don't know yet." The cars were approaching the inner gate. The gate that leads from the palace forecourt to the public road. The one the guards control. The one that, on a normal day, swings open with a smooth, practiced efficiency that makes you understand why people call this country good at certain things. It didn't swing open. The lead car slowed, which it slowed more. It stopped. Now, I want to be precise about what happened next, because this is where people who weren't there get it wrong when they tell the story. They skip the part that matters most, which is the pause. The moment between the car stopping and anything happening, where the whole crowd, without coordinating, without signal, went quiet. Not silent. London is never silent. But the particular noise of 200 tourists doing tourist things dropped, collectively, by about 40%. Like someone had turned a dial. The guard at the gate, and I'm going to describe him now because he matters, he's the whole story, didn't move in the way guards don't move. He moved in a different way. Plus, pretty much, a very specific way. He stepped forward. Just one step. Plus, but, it was a step with intention in it. The kind of step that has paperwork behind it. He was tall, not remarkably so, but, in the uniform, in the bearskin, with that posture, he read as tall in the way a full stop at the end of a sentence reads as final. Mid-30s, maybe. Plus, the parts of his face visible beneath the hat were set in an expression I can only describe as professionally resolute. Not angry. Basically, not uncertain. Resolute the way a locked door is resolute. It isn't against you, personally, which it simply is not going to open. The car sat there. The guard stood there, which Deborah's grip on my arm tightened by approximately the same amount that the crowd's ambient noise had dropped. "Why isn't he opening it?" she said. I didn't answer because I genuinely didn't know. There's a thing that happens in crowds when something breaks the expected pattern. It's not alarm, not yet. It's more like, I think, collective recalibration. Every person present runs a quick internal check. Am I understanding this correctly? Is this normal and I just don't know it? Should someone, be doing something, which for about 30 seconds, that's what 200 people were doing. Running the check. Actually, getting no results. Then, a man near me, an older gentleman, the kind of Englishman who looks like he was issued a flat cap at birth, said, very quietly but with absolute authority, "He's not letting them out." The convoy hadn't moved. The second and third cars had stopped too, settling into position behind the first with the resigned patience of vehicles that had long since made peace with waiting. No one emerged from them. No window came down. No hand appeared with an explanatory gesture. The guard remained exactly where he was. A second guard, who had been positioned further inside the forecourt, had now moved to stand a few feet back from his colleague, not beside him, which would have looked collaborative, but behind him, which looked like something else. Support. Plus, backup. The kind of positioning that said, this decision has been made and it's being stood behind, literally. A woman in a blue puffer jacket near the front railing turned to her companion and said something in rapid Italian. Her companion took a photo. Then, another. Plus, then, a small burst of them, the camera making that soft, urgent clicking sound of someone who isn't sure what they're documenting but is very sure they should be documenting it. That was the moment it spread. Phones came out. Not all at once, in a wave, starting from the front end, rolling back through the crowd like something tipping over in slow motion. By the to be fair, time it reached where Deborah and I were standing, the collective electronic eye of about 150 people was pointed at the gate. Something happened, Deborah said. Something happened inside. She wasn't asking, and she was processing. I nodded slowly, because she wasn't wrong. The gate doesn't stay shut by accident. A car with that flag on its bonnet doesn't sit outside the exit of Buckingham Palace while a ceremonial guard stands in front of it due to administrative error. Something had happened inside. The question that none of us standing outside that railing could answer, but that every single one of us was now very much asking, was what? I should tell you what I'd heard, because it reached us in pieces. Not from official sources, which from the crowd. From the particular telephone without telephone system of people who overhear people who overheard something and carry it outward in both directions simultaneously. It started with a word. A single word, moving through the gathered people in a low current. Not a shout, which not an announcement. Just a word that passed from mouth to ear to mouth, each repetition slightly different in tone, some disbelieving, some excited. Some, I think, hushed with a reverence that the situation either deserved or very much didn't, and it was too soon to know which. The word was Charlotte. Princess Charlotte. 12 years old, at the time of this story. Fourth in line. Daughter of William and Catherine. A child, look, which sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's the thing that matters most and the thing that gets lost first in all conversations about royal children. She was 12. She was at the palace that day. And she had been. This is where the crowdsourced intelligence fragmented badly, because no one outside those walls actually knew involved in something. An incident, people were saying. An incident with Camilla. I want to be honest with you here. I didn't know, standing at that railing on a Tuesday in October, what had happened between a 12-year-old girl and the Queen Consort inside Buckingham Palace. I still don't know the full shape of it, and I'm going to tell you what I pieced together over the hours. Days that followed, and I'm going to tell you where I'm certain and where I'm guessing, because that distinction matters. What I know for certain, Charlotte was there. Camilla was there, and something occurred that was significant enough that it reached the guard at the gate, reached him through the proper channels, through whatever internal communication system operates inside those walls, and his response was to step forward, plant his feet, and not open the gate. TBH, that's it. That's what's certain. Plus, kind of, everything else is reconstruction. It's piecing together the angle of the cars and the expression on the guard's face and the second guard's position and the 45 minutes that passed before anything changed, and building from those things a theory about what it means when the gates of Buckingham Palace stay shut for a woman whose car is waiting to leave. It means someone decided she shouldn't leave yet. And someone with the authority to make that call, or someone conveying the decision of someone with that authority, had passed that decision to the man standing at the gate. And the man at the gate had done his job. To be continued in part 2. What the guard knew. 45 minutes is a long time to stand still. I know this because I stood still for most of it, which is not something I do naturally or well. Deborah had given up on the Victoria Memorial and was now fully committed to the gate situation, which meant I was committed to it too. Which meant, we were both standing at the railing in the October cold watching a car not move and a guard not move and the space between them not resolve. My coffee was now genuinely, irredeemably cold. The crowd had thickened. Not doubled, the initial surge of curiosity had pulled people in from the edges of the mall and up from the park paths. At a certain point, the human body makes a practical calculation about cold weather and the absence of confirmed drama and starts drifting toward the gift shops on Buckingham Palace Road. But the core of us, maybe 60, 70 people, stayed. There is a type of person who stays. I'm apparently that type. I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not apologetic. There are worse things to be than someone who can't walk away from an unanswered question. The older gentleman with the flat cap had positioned himself directly to my left. His name, I learned in the way you learn things from strangers in prolonged proximity, was Gerald. He had a way of offering information in the manner of someone playing cards on a table, one at a time, face up, watching to see if you appreciated the hand he was building. He'll have received a communication, Gerald said, not to me basically but to the general vicinity. The guard? I said, through the earpiece. Or I guess, a runner, they still use runners for certain things, you know. Seems old-fashioned but it leaves no electronic trace. He paused. They're particular about electronic traces. I looked at the guard. He did have an earpiece. The wire was visible as a thin flesh-colored line disappearing behind the collar of his uniform. He hadn't touched it, which hadn't tilted his head toward it. Hadn't done any of the small unconscious things people do when they're receiving audio. He was simply standing with the gate shut and his orders apparently delivered and his job, for the moment, concluded. The car was, in my opinion, still waiting. What do you think happened? Deborah said. Gerald considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Can't say. But I can tell you what this is. He nodded at the gate. This is a protocol. They don't improvise this. That guard didn't make a personal decision to keep those cars in. Someone above him made a decision, and he's executing it, and he will keep executing it until a different decision comes down. How long does that take? Depends entirely, Gerald said, on who's doing the deciding. Here is what came out in the following days, assembled from sources I'm going to describe as reliable without being specific about who they were, because specific would be unfair and unfair is not the kind of thing this story needs. The afternoon had been an internal family visit. Not a TBH, formal engagement, nothing on the official calendar, nothing with photographers or schedules or the particular choreography of public royal life. The kind of visit that happens between family members who happen to live and work in proximity to one of the most famous buildings in the world and who occasionally find themselves in the same room for reasons that are simply human. Charlotte had been basically there with her father. William had, I think, a meeting, the kind of meeting that takes place in a room with the door closed and lasts longer than planned. The kind that leaves a 12-year-old with an afternoon to fill in a building that's simultaneously the most impressive and most bewildering place a child could be set loose in. She knew it well, theoretically. She'd been, I guess, in it many times. But, knowing a palace and being in a palace with no immediate adult directive are two very different conditions. She'd ended up in one of the private reception rooms. Camilla had been there. I want to be careful here. I want to pretty much be fair. Because the version of events that has the most purchase, the one that spread fastest, the one people reached for because it had the most satisfying architecture, is the one in which there was a confrontation. A moment, which words said, or not said, or said in a tone that carries meaning independent of words. Between a 12-year-old girl and the woman who married her grandfather, who is now the queen consort, who holds a position in the family that has no clean emotional equivalent and no instruction manual. That version has honestly Camilla saying something. It has Charlotte reacting. It has the reaction being significant enough, visible enough, heard by enough of the right people that it made its way out of that reception room and down through the palace's interior channels to the man standing at the gate. That version might be entirely true, which it might be partially true. It might be constructed from the usual mixture of genuine observation and interpersonal telephone game and the particular human hunger for stories about powerful families feeling ordinary things. What I can tell you is this: when the man at the gate received his instruction, he didn't hesitate. That part isn't speculation. I watched him. There was no visible deliberation. No moment of weighing it up. The instruction came and the posture shifted, barely, by centimeters, and that shift said, "We're doing this. This is what we're doing now." That is the face of a person executing an order they believe in. Not blindly. Not robotically. In the way a person executes a decision they understand the reason for and find the reason sufficient. About 20 minutes and I'd given up on the coffee entirely by this point, holding the cup only out of the social awkwardness of having nothing else to do with my hands. Something changed at the cars. Not much. A small change, which the rear door of the lead car opened. Not all the way. Basically, maybe 40 degrees. Enough for a person to lean out without fully exiting. And a person did lean out, someone from the protection detail, in the dark suit that says protection detail in a language every crowd reads instinctively, and he looked at the guard, and the guard looked at him, and something passed between them that had no words and no movement and no sound that I could hear from 40 feet away. The door closed, and the car didn't move. Gerald exhaled next to me, the long, particular exhale of someone who has just had a hypothesis confirmed. He held, Gerald said, "What?" "The guard. The protection officer, just tested it. Looked at him. Gave him the chance to back down, make it easy, say he'd had a misunderstanding about his orders." Gerald's voice carried a particular quiet respect in it. He held. I looked at the guard, and he was exactly where he'd been. Same posture. Same position. The step forward he'd taken when the cars first appeared, he hadn't retreated from it. He was standing in the space between his post and the gate with the particular certainty of a man who has made his calculations and found them solid. "He's protecting someone," Deborah said. It was the first time she'd said anything in about 8 minutes. Gerald and I both looked at her. She was watching the guard with an expression I'd seen on her face earlier when she was reading the Victoria Memorial inscription, the same focused, deliberate attention, like she was making sure she understood the thing correctly before she committed to an interpretation of it. "Not the palace," she said. "Not the institution. Someone specific." She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. We all knew which 12-year-old girl was somewhere inside that building. I've thought a lot about what it means to hold a gate. Not in the metaphorical sense, though that's there too, and I'll get to it, but literally. Physically. To be the person whose body is the mechanism by which a gate stays shut. Do you know that on the other side of the bars is a car with occupants who have every right, in ordinary circumstances, to expect those bars to open. To stand there anyway because the circumstances have been determined, by someone with the authority to determine it, to not be ordinary. There's no drama in the guard's face. That's what I keep coming back to. I've seen dramatic faces in tense situations. They have a recognizable quality, the jaw, the eye movement, the held breath. The guard had none of that. He had the absolute composure of someone performing a function they were trained for, and the training was sufficient, and the function was clear. I found that more moving than I expected to. Not impressive, exactly. Moving, the way a well-made thing is moving, a bridge that holds, a rope that doesn't fray. There's no drama in good construction, which there's just the thing, doing what it was made to do, when the wait comes. The information about Charlotte, what had happened in that reception room, reached the crowd in fragments over the 45 minutes we stood there. Some of it came from people with phones who were refreshing feeds I wasn't on, looking at accounts I didn't follow. Some of it came from that older woman in the blue puffer jacket who turned out to speak excellent English and had been overhearing things from a small group of people near the front railing who seemed to know more than they should and were debating how much to share with each other in voices too low to fully contain. What emerged, in the aggregate, was something like this: Charlotte had encountered Camilla in the reception room. There had been an exchange, not a fight, not in any version of the story I heard, but something sharper than pleasantries. Something that a 12-year-old girl, who had been waiting for her father for 2 hours in a palace that belongs to her family in theory and to history and practice, had said in response to something Camilla had said to her first. The specifics of what was said I never got clearly. I don't have them now. The words dissolved in the retelling the way words do when they pass through too many people in too short a time. What survived the retelling was the fact of it. That something had been said. That Charlotte hadn't been invisible or irrelevant or easy to overlook, as children in complicated family situations sometimes choose to be. That she had said what she had said, and it had been heard by people who carry things upward through the palace's internal architecture. And that somewhere in that architecture, a decision had been made. Not a punishment. I want to be clear about that. Plus, the gate being shut was not, from what I could piece together, a punitive gesture. It wasn't Camilla being detained in any formal or threatening sense. It was something more specific than that and, also, in its way, more interesting. It was, to be fair, an interval, which a pause, deliberately inserted into an afternoon that had moved too fast in the wrong direction, to allow the right people to speak to each other before the thing that had happened was allowed to disperse into the world. Before cars drove off and people returned to their own schedules and the afternoon calcified into a version of itself that couldn't be reconsidered. The gate was shut because someone, and I believe it was someone who cared about both Charlotte. The outcome decided that there needed to be a conversation before there was a departure. And the guard at the gate was the physical expression of that decision. He was 40 feet of paws in a bearskin hat. The for what it's worth, Italian woman in the blue puffer jacket finally introduced herself, because crises of any scale create a particular social intimacy. Her name was Federica, and she had a connection, oblique but real, to someone who worked in the palace's administrative offices. Not in a sensitive capacity. Something to do with catering coordination, but enough of a connection that she had, in the previous 20 minutes, sent a text and received one in return. The text she'd received said 3 words. She showed it to Gerald, who showed it to me, who showed it to Deborah, who read it twice and then looked at the gate. The 3 words were, "Charlotte is fine." That was all, and Charlotte is fine. 3 sort of words that answered nothing about what had happened and everything about what mattered. That cut through the crowdsourced intelligence and the overheard fragments and the competing interpretations like a key through the correct lock, and what they opened was simply, she's okay. Whatever it was, wherever it went, the child is okay. Gerald nodded once, slowly, in the way of a man who has received the verdict he was expecting. Deborah handed Federica's phone back to her. I looked at the guard at the gate. He was still there. Plus, still in position. Still with the same posture and the same expression, which was no particular expression at all. He didn't know what I now knew. Or maybe he did, maybe the same information had come down through his earpiece, revised and reconfigured. I couldn't tell. His face didn't change. Plus, the gate was still shut. But something in the air had changed. The quality of the waiting had shifted from tension to something softer. From the held breath to the released one. The crowd, picking look up on it in that collective osmotic way, had shifted too, phones lowering slightly, shoulders dropping a fraction, the ambient chatter resuming at a volume closer to normal. The guards stood. The cars waited. The October afternoon did what October afternoons do, deepened, went a shade darker, promised rain without delivering it. And then, 17 minutes later, the gate opened. To be continued in part 3, after the gates. It didn't swing. That's the first thing, which you'd expect it to swing. You've been waiting 45 minutes. You have that TBH, particular coiled spring feeling of a crowd that has invested time in a situation and now requires a proportionate payoff. You expect the gate to swing open with some kind of ceremony, a decisive movement, a flourish of mechanics that matches the weight of what preceded it. It didn't. It opened the way a gate opens when there's no drama left in it. Quietly. In the manner of a thing that has performed its function and is now simply moving aside. For what it's worth, the guard stepped back. Plus, one step. The same deliberateness as the step forward, 45 minutes before. The same geometry, intentional, unhurried, belonging to someone whose every movement has been trained into a kind of language. The step back said, "This is concluded," not, "I was wrong." Not, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Just, "This is concluded," in the same tone a chapter heading uses when it ends. The lead car moved. The crowd, 60, 70 people, plus however, many had gathered at the edges without my noticing, made a sound. Not a cheer. Not a gasp. Something in between that didn't have a clean name. The sound of witnessing. Of having waited long enough to feel that the end of the wait meant something. Deborah's grip had been on my arm for the last 23 minutes without either of us acknowledging it. The cars passed through the gate in that same unhurried convoy formation. One, then, the second after a measured interval, then, the third. Moving toward the road without acceleration. Like kind of water resuming its course after something has been removed from the stream. I watched the windows. I don't know what I expected to see. The windows were the kind that don't tell you anything. Tinted pretty much, to the precise degree that says, "There's a person in here, and that person is not for your information." No shape at the glass, which no movement of a hand or a face. They passed, they turned onto the road. They were gone. The gate, without ceremony, began to close. Gerald uncrossed his arms. He'd been standing with them crossed for the better part of an hour, not aggressively, just the way English men of a certain generation stand when they're thinking seriously about something and want their body to signal as much. He uncrossed them and put his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the space where the cars had been with an expression that I can only describe as satisfied. Not pleased. Not triumphant, which satisfied. Like a problem had been handled correctly. "He'll get nothing for that," Gerald said. I looked at him. The guard, no commendation. No recognition. This doesn't go in anyone's newsletter. He said it without bitterness, simply as a fact about how certain things work. He held like a gate on a Tuesday afternoon because he was told to. He did it correctly. Tomorrow he'll hold a different gate or stand a different post and someone else will take a photo of him and walk away and never think about him again. A pause. That's the job. I have thought about Gerald's summary many times since October. That's the job. 3 words, same count as Charlotte is fine. Both sets of 3 words doing more work than their quantity suggests they should be able to. There's something I find very English about what the guard did, and I say that not as a criticism or a reduction, but as an observation about a particular mode of human behavior that doesn't get celebrated often enough because it doesn't lend itself to celebration. The mode that performs its function at the exact moment the function is required, without announcement and without needing the announcement, and then goes back to standing still. It is not heroism in the loud sense. there was no physical bravery involved, no danger, no rescue. What there was, what I watched through a railing on a cold Tuesday while holding a cup of cold coffee, was a person choosing, in a moment that required a choice, to do the thing they were there to do. To do it fully, without calculation about personal cost or personal benefit. Without visible hesitation. Without, well, as far as I could tell, fear. That is, well, a rarer thing than it sounds. Deborah pretty much let go of my arm. Right, she said. Do you think the gift shop is still open? I stared at her. I want a tea towel. You just watched, I know what I just watched. She turned away from the gate. Started walking with the same purposeful energy she'd applied to photographing the Victoria Memorial. I also want a tea towel, and these things are not in conflict. I looked at the gate once more. Closed now. The guard back in position, the original position, the ceremonial one, the one tourists photograph. Already, a couple at the front railing were framing a shot. The woman posed with a thumbs up. The TBH guard stared through her the way guards have always stared through people taking photos, not rudely, not unkindly, but with the implication of being very much elsewhere. I went to find Deborah. Here's what actually I've been able to put together since, slowly, over weeks, from the kind of sources that don't go on record and the kind of conversations that happen in the margins of other conversations. The reception, honestly, room meeting, if you can call it that, lasted somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes, depending on who you ask. Charlotte had been there waiting. Camilla had come in. The circumstances that brought them into the same room are less important than what happened inside it, and what happened, the consensus version, the one that most closely matches the guard's subsequent behavior, goes something like this. Camilla had said something about the family. About adjustments. About the way certain things would need to be understood going forward, framed in the way of a woman who has spent years learning to work through the vocabulary of this particular institution. Not unkindly, basically, I don't think unkindly, from any version I've heard. But, in the register of an adult who has perhaps forgotten what it's to be 12 in a room full of history. Complexity and the dense emotional weather of a family that has been a family and a symbol simultaneously for so many decades that sometimes the symbol crowds out the family. Charlotte, who was by multiple accounts neither timid nor without opinion, had said something in return. What she actually said, I won't repeat here. Not because I'm protecting her, she was 12 and doesn't need my protection, but because the specific words were never something I got clearly, and guessing at the words of a child in a difficult moment is not the kind of speculation I'm comfortable with. The shape of what she said, as it was described to me, direct. Personal. The kind of thing that, once said, fills the room differently than it was filled before. Camilla had left the room. The request, the decision, had moved upward. And it had come back down to the gate as an instruction. I've seen versions of this story that make the guard the hero in a large sense. The man who stood up to a queen consort. The defender of a princess. The palace sentinel who chose child over institution. They tend to get shared with capital letters and dramatic music if there's a video component. I don't think that's quite it. He wasn't standing up to Camilla. Camilla wasn't being detained, punished, confronted. She was being, as I understand it, as I piece it together, given time she hadn't asked for. Perhaps would not, to be fair, have chosen to allow certain people to have certain conversations before the afternoon dispersed into its separate vehicles and separate schedules. The guard was the time. He was the interval made physical. Someone, somewhere I think, in that palace's interior, someone who understood both Charlotte's position and the complexity of the afternoon. The value of not letting things resolve too quickly in the wrong direction, had decided that 45 minutes of pause was necessary. And the mechanism, of that pause, was a man in a bearskin hat who stepped forward one step and stayed there. He held it because he was asked to hold it. He held it because the ask came from someone with the authority to ask. He held it because, perhaps, he understood, in the way that people who have done a job with full attention for long enough develop a feel for what the job is actually for, that this was one of the moments the job existed to handle. Not the ceremonial moments. Not the tourist photo moments. This kind of moment. The ones that aren't in the schedule. I went back to the mall the following Saturday. Not to look for anything. Deborah had returned to Coventry with her tea towel and her memories, and I was there on my own, doing the thing Londoners do in good weather autumn when the mood for walking takes over from the mood for having a destination. I walked past the palace, which passed the gates. Past the Victoria Memorial, which looks exactly as enormous and permanent as it always does and thinks nothing of you for looking at it. There was a guard at the gate. I couldn't tell if it was the same one. From the distance of the pavement, in the uniform and the bearskin, they're deliberately indistinguishable. That's the point of the uniform. You're not looking at a person, you're looking at a post. The individual inside it's beside the point. But I knew, in the way you know things about people after you've watched them do something real, that somewhere inside that uniform was a person. With a name I didn't know. With a life that existed outside of this railing and this forecourt and this particular Tuesday in October. A person who had, 17 days ago, received an instruction through an earpiece and taken one deliberate step forward and stood there for 45 minutes while the world, in its small public portion, watched. And, who had to be fair, got nothing for it. No commendation. Pretty much, no newsletter. No photograph that captured anything other than the back of a bearskin. Just the gate, opened when it was time, closed again. The afternoon resuming. Plus, the cars on the road. I think, Charlotte, fine. The institution, unruptured. The afternoon's difficult weather absorbed and processed through channels most people never see and some people spend their whole working lives maintaining. I stopped walking for a moment. A tourist beside me stopped too, momentarily, then realized I wasn't looking at anything they could photograph and moved on. I looked at pretty much the gate, and the gate looked back the way gates do, which is to say, with no expression and complete indifference and a kind of ancient patient solidity that makes you feel, standing in front of it, that you are the temporary thing and it's the permanent one. I thought about 45 minutes. I thought about one step forward, and I thought about a 12-year-old girl in a reception room saying the thing that was true, regardless of the room it was set in. Because sometimes the truth is the only thing that actually belongs to you. I thought about the word Charlotte is fine, which is 3 words and feels like an exhale. I started walking again. The October light, look, that particular amber grey London light that makes even the ordinary look considered, was doing its thing across the park. A pigeon, I think, landed near my feet and regarded me with the flat, assessing gaze of a city creature who has long since concluded that most humans aren't worth the energy and is giving you one chance to prove it wrong. I didn't have anything for it, which it flew off. Somewhere behind me, at the gate, a tourist took a photograph of a guard who didn't look at them. Somewhere inside the palace, or not inside, somewhere else by now, in some other room in some other building, a girl who was 12 went on being 12, with all the difficulty and the clarity and the strange, particular courage that being 12 in a complicated family sometimes requires. And the guards stood. As guards do. As guards have always done, which the gate behind him, shut or open depending on the hour, but always there. In my opinion, always a gate. Always something that can be held, which the gates of Buckingham Palace are made to keep things in as much as they're made to keep things out. Most people, standing at the railing with their phones, only ever see one direction of that. But, every so often, on an ordinary Tuesday, you get a glimpse of the other, the side where the gate is not a barrier but a decision. Where the man standing in front of it's not a fixture or a photograph or a piece of ceremonial furniture, but a person doing the only thing, in that moment, that matters. He held, and that was enough. End.